Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Josh Dech wasn't long into his career as a paramedic when he realized that he was working in sick care rather than working in healthcare. His patients weren't getting better. In fact, they were getting worse. After driving the same people to the hospital repeatedly and watching most of them get sicker or die, he left paramedics and went into personal training. After working with hundreds of clients, he realized that the common denominator for his clients' health issues, including skin issues, brittle hair, hormones, weight loss resistance, etc., was related to nutrition, digestive health, and strength. Josh went back to school and became a holistic nutritionist and specialized in gut health. He had numerous clients who were getting relief, but he quickly realized the extent of digestive issues with his clients who were living confined to their houses with up to 50 bowel movements a day. Oh my goodness. Crippling pain and brain fog, who were afraid to leave their house for fear of having accidents. His love for this field of healthcare came from watching adults get their lives back. Most doctors believe gut issues are forever. Josh wants to prove them wrong. You can find Josh on his website at www.gutsolution.ca. Josh Dech, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, man, thanks so much for having me.
It is such an honor to host you. I love your work. You do great
Thank you.
content. I purposely left out of the introduction that you have two podcasts which you host. I really enjoy them both. You have like the perfect podcasting voice. You're like the absolute opposite of my voice, where I get way too excited, my voice gets way too high, and I talk way too fast. You're the perfect, like calming, soothing voice, and I'm really enjoying checking out your content. So I really appreciate
Let
it.
me tell you, Casey, it's not come without years of practice. My mom, my wife, my entire life, slow down your speaking, slow down your chewing. You're not a pelican. So it's been a long time of just learning how to take pauses. I joined Toastmasters. This doesn't come naturally, but I appreciate you.
Well, kudos to you for putting in the work because it really shows up and makes your shows very enjoyable. You're
Thank
calling
you.
from Canada, from the Calgary area. I understand I actually have some
Yes, sir.
family that has come from that area of the world. But you also spent a little bit of time in Newfoundland, which I wanted to chat with you about a little bit. What was it like to spend some time in Newfoundland?
Cold.
Good answer.
It was honestly every stereotype you hear about the Newfies is true, and they are the most wonderful, gentlest, kindest people. Like that to me was the antithesis of the Canadian culture. And I'll tell you, it wasn't just I spent some time in St. John, so the capital as well. And but where I lived was actually an hour south down the southern shore, a little town called Ferryland. And I was there for about a year. And if you know Newfoundland, that's the town with the White House, or the lighthouse rather, the White House. It is a white and red lighthouse, but that's where we had the lighthouse. And my little base, it was this little white house in the middle of nowhere. And I'm telling you, Casey, maybe if you were sitting in your living room looking at the end of your neighbor's backyard across the road, that was the ocean from my kitchen. And it was just beautiful in the summer, freaking cold in the winter. I mean, 3, 4 feet of snow. I remember times we'd have to pull the ambulance out with another truck. We'd have to tow it out because it would get buried in snow overnight when we get a late night call. So it was amazing for the weather. Icebergs. I'd sit on my deck in the summertime and like on the porch with a cup of coffee, and I'm watching whales breach in the water at like 7 a.m. with the
Wow.
sun shining. So it's a magical place if you can handle the winter, but the people are just the salt of the earth. Some amazing memories and amazing lifelong friendships from there.
That's amazing. I was really hoping you were going to say that. Not a lot of people know this story, but it's one of my favorite stories ever. Do you know the story about Gander, Newfoundland on 9/11? What happened there?
No, I don't.
Okay, so for the first time ever on 9/11, all the airspace in the United States was closed. And so planes had to land immediately. And there were also planes incoming from places like Europe or whatever. And if they crossed halfway over here, they didn't have the fuel to just turn around and go back to London or Hamburg or wherever they came from in Europe. So they had to land, but they couldn't do so in the United States. So a lot of people don't know this, but one of the biggest runways in the world is in Gander in Newfoundland because
Wow.
back in the time before jets in World War II, you had to stop and refuel there before you could cross the Atlantic. And so all of a sudden, this tiny town in Newfoundland called Gander, 10,000 people, all of a sudden takes in 6,000 people, 36 jumbo jets full of people. And the townspeople just went right to
Yes,
work. They went right, they made
I heard
food,
about that.
stay
They
in my
brought them into their
house, take
houses. Yeah.
showers, we'll get you cigarettes, we just donate all the there's just like an endless amount of stories of kindness and inviting people to birthday parties. And like we walk down the
Yeah.
street and somebody's like, "Hey, we're having a little barbecue in the backyard. You should come hang out." And like it just the coolest story. And it just sounds like the
Wow.
most wonderful people. It's just heartwarming.
That's Newfoundland for you. And there are all these little towns. I mean, even St. John's is what, 150,000 people, maybe. The population of where Fairyland, where I was like 500. So it was quite small. But there's these pockets. And it really is this very close knit, hardened soil, like Canadian, the antithesis of Canadianism. If what you imagine it to be by a stereotype, that is Newfoundland. And I really do miss it. It's got a special place in my heart forever.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I really love and appreciate that. I'm glad you could confirm that. And I'm glad that that's what you led with. The first thing you said is, besides it's very cold, is that the people are amazing. So I think
They're
all of us
incredible.
could take some lessons from that. You have such an interesting story. We mentioned a little bit of it in the introduction. You know quite a bit about gut health, I think is fair to say at this point. How did that become your main focus of all the things you could have focused on? Why was it that became like the big thing that you wanted to know the most about?
I got one of those same old boring pain to purpose stories, It's something that had been in my life forever. I've always had gut issues. I remember my mom had gut issues and it almost killed her. When I was probably 11, I was in baseball and I was really bad at baseball, mind you. So we go out after every game or every practice and we go out for McDonald's, grab an ice cream or a sandwich or something. And that was just kind of the routine. And I'm not sure if it was celebration or commiseration because again, I was bad. But what ended up happening is one day my mom always had gut issues. She'd go upstairs, lay on her side, and eventually the gas would pass and she'd be fine. We went out for baseball or after baseball one time for McDonald's. She got a Big Mac and she went upstairs and laid down on her side, hoped the gas and the pain would start to pass. And it never did. It started getting worse and worse and worse. And I remember my stepdad, who's my baseball coach. There's a fun story. But anyway, so he comes upstairs and I remember looking in the bedroom and it was dark and smelled like farts. And he's sitting on the edge of the bed and he said, "We need to go to the hospital." And she goes, "No, no, no. Ambulances make me sick. It'll pass. It's fine." Comes back 30, 40 minutes later and she's sweaty and cold. He says, "We're going now." Something in his gut told him to go. And they rushed her in when he got to the hospital. She went to emergency surgery. And the surgeon said, had she not come in tonight, the next couple of hours, she probably would have died at home.
Oh my
What
goodness.
ended up happening was she perforated her bowel. So she had a little tiny hole that popped and she was leaking bowel content. So stool and fecal matter, all these things were leaking into her abdomen and they were poisoning her body. And she went into a state called sepsis, which is basically toxic or toxic shock. And that nearly killed her. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They ended up removing a foot of her intestines. They put in a mesh, they put in a colostomy bag. And over the course of her gut health, she had her gallbladder removed, 2 feet of intestine removed, and several surgeries. So it was very close to home for me. My dad had it, but I'll skip ahead here. When I was in sports as a teenager, always had nervous belly. I was a wrestler, high level competitive wrestler, and before a tournament or a match, I'd have to run to the bathroom and I'd have loose bowels all the time. And right until I was probably 18, 19, I started getting really bad acne. It was all over my back. And by the time I was in my mid 20s, it was down my arms, it was on my wrists. I had acne coming up. It was up my neck, not an inch across my back, not covered in this stuff. My gut was a mess. And I hit an all time low there, Casey, where because your gut and your brain are connected. And what ended up happening was I had ADHD, always have, but it was amplified a thousandfold. I couldn't sit, couldn't focus. Business was spiraling out of control. Addiction at an all-time high, seeking those dopamine hits. And for me, it was actually sexual addiction that did it for me. And so I was, it was girls, it was pornography, it was whatever it was that would keep me distracted to try to balance the chemistry in my brain. I was having severe depression, even suicidal thoughts to the point where I planned it on many occasions. And the only reason it didn't go through is I was afraid I would fail and be a vegetable. So I was chronically depressed. My psychiatrist put me on Vyvanse and things got worse. I was a train wreck. And it wasn't until I got help balancing out my gut. Acne went away, joint pain went away, energy came back. I was up to 15 bowel movements a day. I had blood in my stool, mucus, 10-minute transit times where I eat and I'm in the bathroom, undigested food in my stool. I was just falling apart at 25 years old. And I got help to reverse it. My doctor said, well, here's something to slow your bowels down. If they get too slow, here's something to speed them back up. Managing my symptoms. And I got help to get to the root of this and reverse it. And only then did I realize that the body can really heal itself. And there's layers to that, but that's sort of the gist.
Wow, I love that story. What a difficult thing to go through, but it's those moments that kind of like define us. So thank
Yeah.
you for being so vulnerable with that. And I'm always just so surprised by this. Like when we hear about people in the emergency room, we hear about people doing paramedics. We think that you're out with all the car crashes and the shootings and all this stuff. And I'm always just stunned when I ask somebody who works in an emergency setting, what percentage of the cases that you were on were actually something acute that happened versus something that was much more chronic? Can you talk about like the cases that you would see over and over again and how they wouldn't necessarily be what we would think of as an emergency?
Absolutely. So typically it's 85-15, at least in my experience, and I imagine a lot of medics would agree. It's 85% medical calls, 15% trauma. And trauma is what it sounds like: car accidents, injuries, shootings, hangings, self-harm, whatever. That's the 15%. The 85% is medical. And the vast majority of these, if not all of them, are going to be heart disease, which is again 30, 40 years earlier where it starts. Diabetes, insulin issues. We've had people who have been in, too much insulin or not enough sugar and they're unconscious and in a coma. We've had drug overdoses, and that's a small percentage, but most of them strokes, heart disease, kidney issues, even hospital transfers. You pick a patient up, go from one hospital to another because it's just part of the routine depending on the service you're in. 85% of the calls we saw were medical. And looking back, knowing what I know now, nearly 100% of those are entirely preventable. These
Wow.
strokes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, kidney disease, you name it. And in fact, I did the math on this one. This is a couple years old data. Maybe they changed it since, COVID and all that garbage has come through. But according to the CDC, I looked at 15 top leading causes of death in North America, 13 of them rather. So I think that's 93% were all connected in some way, shape, or form to your gut, and they're all chronic inflammatory diseases, which means the top 93% leading causes of death are also entirely preventable.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I want to go back to your career and the transition from what you're doing before into personal training and then into the world of nutrition. I'm assuming that you didn't do that to make more money. Personal training can be quite a challenge, and getting into nutrition can be quite challenging as well. And I don't see many people stick it out for as long as you have, which tells me that your passion for this subject is just so super high. But tell us what it was like to leave paramedics behind and get into training and what that was like for you.
It was actually an accident. I still wanted to be a paramedic. When I came from Newfoundland, I went back to home in Ontario and I was trying to find a job. I drove from Windsor, Ontario to Sudbury. That's about 8, 9 hours north. Every town along the way, meeting managers, shaking hands, resumes, as many jobs as I could try to apply to, I would. And then I came out to Alberta. Buddy talked me into it, said, work on the oil rigs. It's good money. You be a medic, 150K a year or something to start. I was like, sign me up. And this is in 2013 or 2014. So 150K went a lot further than it does now. So long and short, while I was trying to transfer my license, I became a personal trainer. And that's when my eyes for the first time were open beyond my own gut issues. I had a woman who came to see me, first client named Lynn, 57 years old. And here I am, probably 22, 23. And she came in to see me. And she was on 17 pills and insulin for breakfast. She had 9 pills and insulin for bedtime. She had high blood pressure. She slept with a CPAP machine. She was on the disability list at work. So everything that she had compounding in her life, she was circling the drain, getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And we worked together from 57 and she was till she was 59, 3 days a week. All we did was change her diet, fix her sleep, get her more fresh air, and exercise for 30 minutes, 3 days a week with strength training. Here she is, 59 years old. Her eyesight improved. She was no longer diabetic, so she's getting more oxygenation. She actually had her glasses prescription reduced. She was off all but 2 medications in 2 years' time. And here she is at 59. She entered her first powerlifting competition in the Raw Powerlifting Federation here in Canada, and she broke a Canadian world record from
That's
disability.
amazing.
Yeah, from 57 on disability to 59 and a record breaker. And she kept breaking world records. Most of them were her own until she was about 61, 62 when she retired from weightlifting competitively. But that was my first kick to say, like, look what's possible with the human body. It is constantly trying to repair you. That's what inflammation is. If we can recognize that inflammation is simply a healing response where your body is actively working to try to either remove something from your body or repair the damage something has caused, we can then lean into that and say, what does my body need? What tools and resources does it need to finish this job so I can actually get better? It's the chronic inflammation that breaks us down over time. And that's where we get sick and see these illnesses, which, I mean, we want to get into the finances of illness. That'll make you vomit.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, I was just going to ask you, like, we're sitting in two very developed nations. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, and yet we look like we're very, very sick. How did all this happen? How did we get to this spot?
Well, do you want to go back in time to history to Rockefeller
Let's go
medicine?
back in time. Let's go
I
back
love
in
this
time.
story. Let's do it. Here's the deal. Back in the late 1800s, 1861 to 1865, we had the American Civil War. Right up through that entire point, they were actually using herbs and botanicals. In fact, Dr. Francis Porcher actually released a book, I believe it was 1862, called Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests. Now, he was a botanist, physician and a botanist, and his mom had plant-based medicine and stuff as well. So he grew up around this. And all these infections, gangrene that all these soldiers were getting from the Civil War, he created this book, and the Surgeon General said, distribute this to everyone far and wide. That was their number one priority, was getting this book out to all the armies and all the camps. And what they did is they picked all the plants and the herbs around the area and made medicine, which helped these soldiers heal up. And many historians actually say the war should have ended in 63, but it went all the way to 1865 because of this book that was created. And I believe that was actually the Confederate side, if I'm not mistaken. So we have been using herbs and plants for thousands of years, right up to the documented 1865, where things are really, right at the crest, rather, of the Industrial Revolution. Well, here we are now, late 1800s, and John D. Rockefeller founds Standard Oil. And what he realized very quickly is that these petroleum byproducts you could actually use to make things like drugs and medicine. So he paired up with the steel tycoon, Andrew Carnegie. And so here you have John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie paired up together and said, we want to reform the medical system. Now, there's a nice intent. Well, they looked at all these medical colleges and schools, said, look, some people are practicing sound waves and frequencies. Some people are practicing herbs or homeopathy. Some people are just winging it and guessing. Like, there's no standardization in medicine. So they said, we want to standardize everything. And this is where they took Abraham Flexner, he was actually a school teacher, and said, we want you to run across all 155 medical colleges across America. And we want you to take a look and see what they're doing, document their stuff, come on back. And in 1911, if I'm not mistaken, or 1911 maybe, he published what's called the Flexner Report, which was just a scathing review of all the medical colleges. And he said, everything's wrong. Nothing is standardized. We need medicine. So here we are. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, and Carnegie, the steel tycoon, started funding schools and started using these petroleum byproducts to create what we now know as pharmaceuticals. And all these medicines went out to the colleges through their political influence, lobbying, fundraising, and financial power, being the wealthiest people in America. The long and short is they went to these schools and said, you need to do what we tell you. Get on this new curriculum, our pharmaceuticals and petroleums, or you lose your funding and shut down. Nearly half of all schools shut down. I think it was 90 some percent of natural medicine, herbal medicine schools shut down. Or collectively, nearly half of all medical colleges in the USA had shut down. And they then reformed and rebuilt what we have today known as big pharmaceutical medicine. And this is what now governs. They had their hands in the FDA, the American Heart Association, Cancer Association. All these things have been rooted by the Rockefellers, by political and financial influence, by this mega, richest family in America. And that has what's now shaped medicine as we see it today. Big pharma funds about 25% of medical school on average, some schools more like 50%. They determine the tests, the labs that get run, they determine all the things the doctors learn what gets put in the textbook. Therefore, I would call it medical indoctrination. And so the problem is now where we stand is in medicine, you have people with these chronic inflammatory diseases or conditions. And what we have now is we take chronic inflammation and we treat it with acute treatment chronically. We use anti-inflammatories on a chronic recurring basis to keep the inflammation under control. This is what we call sick care, not health care. We're not going to the roots to say, why is my body inflamed? What is it trying to heal me or protect me from? And what does it need to do the job? It's like your body is screaming for help through symptoms. It's communicating to you. And we put tape over its mouth and we go, look, we fixed it. And then you live with chronic disease. Collectively now, what this has done, to answer the original question about finances, between three major industries, the biggest ones in the USA, you have hospital stays, pharmaceuticals, and health insurance are the three biggest industries that make up 4.7 trillion with a T, $4.7 trillion a year in North America. That's 18% of the entire country's GDP. 18%, nearly 1/5 of the entire country's profits come from sickness, disease, and medicine. And to push that one step further before I shut up off my rant here, Casey, North America is less than 5%. Well, I'm going to say Canada, US, next Mexico, but Canada, US is less than 5% of the entire global population. They make up nearly 70% of the global pharmaceutical profits.
Um,
We have a problem.
That is a problem. That is absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you going into detail with that and the history. And then you mentioned those three industries. What about a fourth one that shouldn't be too far behind, which is the food industry? And you think about how that story fit in with, Procter and Gamble, and they creating, food from seed oils, if you want to call it food, and the story of
100%.
Crisco, and then
Frankenfoods, yeah.
exactly. And you mentioned the American Heart Association, how they got wrapped up in making the cholesterol recommendations, and Ansel Keys and all these other stories of people
Mhm.
making money from a completely novel system, moving away from all those things that you mentioned earlier that we used to use to help people actually make them better. And I love the way you described we're using acute treatments chronically to fix chronic problems. What a disaster.
It is a disaster. And here's the thing, depends on what side of the aisle you sit on. Oh, it's a conspiracy. It's actually documented fact. If you just put it together in chronological order, it is extraordinarily damning. In fact, John D. Rockefeller was quoted allegedly, again, it's not in print, from his own words, but it was allegedly at some conference. He had said, competition is a sin. And so he goes out to squash and nix everybody to monopolize this industry. And now pharmaceutical companies control the world. They really do. You have every major news organization and news station, which is basically a propaganda station, has somebody from the pharmaceutical board sitting on the board. There are two countries in the world that actually allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV. USA is one of them. The other one, I believe, is New Zealand.
Correct.
Everyone else says no. So we do have what looks to be corporate America, where we have all these mega corporations, quote, lobbying. It's like bribery with no extra steps. It's just hidden behind political lingo. But they lobby, they purchase, they fund campaigns and do all these things to get Congress and to get politicians to vote in their favor. And this is where we now have the FDA, who, again, back to Rockefeller and big food and the big circle jerk it all is, are now all in this. And I will say it is a huge conspiracy. You have big food who gets you sick, so you rely on big pharma. When in order to do that, what do you have to do? You have to get a job that you hate for benefits you should never need to treat a disease or manage a disease you never should have had.
Wow, that's wild. So since you're in Canada, I mean, have you seen the advertisements for medications?
All the time. Yeah,
You do get to see
it's
them.
yeah, we're closer every single year. We get closer and closer in culture and TV and all that from the US. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. They're absolutely insufferable. I hate them. And they're really long, and they have the long list of all the side effects that they have to read out every time. And it's like
Right.
they're so obnoxious. And they're in between every news story. And they show these happy people, gardening or riding their bikes, and like, oh, I feel so much better with X da 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 medication. It's like it's terrible. You're not missing them if you don't have to see them
Um,
all the time. And
but
so
the
okay, so
irony is, you get these people on TV who are like, "Oh, look how happy I am! I'm out in the sunshine gardening. I've got Celebrex for my depression." I'm like, if you went to the sunshine and gardened every day, you wouldn't be depressed.
good point. That is so true. Great point. I love that. So that we end up in this situation, and I know what you're going to say when I say this, where doctors will literally tell people that digestive issues have nothing to do with the food that they're eating. How do you respond to that?
Oh, I, I'm speechless. I hear this all the time from gastroenterologists. So we're talking digestive specialists who deal with digestive disease, who will literally tell their patients, food has no bearing on your gut health. Eat whatever you want, it doesn't matter. You're going to tell me what I put in my gut does not affect my gut. And I've had doctors who would tell their patients that the gut microbiome is still just a theory. Back to Hippocrates, dude, 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates knew all diseases began in the gut. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff wrong with their medicine, but they had the idea. And we actually saw Louis Pasteur in France, was it 1867, first discovered through a microscope spoiled milk and said, holy, there's all these bacteria. You can even take it another decade or so before that to 1845 or 50 with Ignaz Semmelweis. And they teach this story in medical school where they said, I'll keep it short for you, but there were two medical wards, one that had doctors and one that had midwives. The ones with the doctors had something like a 30+% mortality rate of women dying, what they called childbed fever. And in the other wards with just the midwives, it was like 2%. And what they found is these doctors in the medical wards would do autopsies with the scalpels. They drop stuff on the floor, brush it off, put it in their pocket, and they'd use those same hands carrying death to these women. And it turns out that was staph bacteria and it was sepsis that they were bringing to these women. And they didn't realize that. And Ignaz Semmelweis was the first to identify it. But of course, the hubris of the medical system actually shunned him and shut him down. And ended up going crazy. He was in prison and was beaten by guards and actually died of sepsis. So irony was on him. But
Irony.
then again, a decade or two later, Louis Pasteur again discovered bacteria in a microscope. And then that's when they came up and said, oh, all bacteria are evil and it's a war. And this is where antibiotics came through the early mid 1900s. And since then, bacteria have now been identified as friends. All the way back to the early 90s, the fathers of functional medicine, we're talking Jeffrey Bland and Leo Galland, and all these guys came out and said bacteria is a thing. 2007, they established what's called the Human Microbiome Project, where they actually mapped the entire genome of the human microbiome or gut microbiome as best they could and said, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. They did nasal swabs, skin swabs, vaginal, gut, and I believe there was one more they had tested. And they said, look at all these microbiomes. These are good guys that balance us. And still, you get doctors saying it's just a theory. This was $170 million project to come out with a human microbiome project, which shattered everything medicine thought it knew. And you still get doctors saying, it's just a theory, eat whatever you want, food doesn't matter. It's this third grade biology now. It's unbelievable. And if that's what your doctor says, get a new one. They're wildly incompetent or stubborn as far as I'm concerned.
I'm trying to find like an analogy. It's like saying that like putting corn oil in my car has nothing to do with the engine's performance or something. Like it makes no sense. And when we look
Crazy.
at the things that we're eating today, when you're talking about inflammation becoming chronic in nature, so not just the acute that you mentioned, but also chronic, it's always there. What are the main offenders? What are the things that people are eating? I think this will be fairly obvious to most people listening to the show, but as you're looking at our current diets, what do you see as the biggest offenders in our guts?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one is chronic stress. We're always under fire. Politics and the news, the media is the biggest stressors that we have in our lives today. You open up your phone, you flick on Instagram or something, you scroll through, and immediately you're stressed out. These chronic stressors dismantle our gut. They slow down digestive motility, so you don't move food through like you should. It actually inhibits or even shuts down stomach acid production, which is going to inhibit nutrient absorption. It's going to change the bacteria coming in and out of your gut. You get hyperfermentation, overgrowth, bad guys infect the works. So stress is gnarly. On top of that, chronic stress inflames your gut, which again gives way to opportunistic or problematic microbes to overgrow. So stress is our big one. Number two, seed oils. And somehow, for some reason, there's a debate about whether or not they're actually bad. It's unbelievable to me. Now, I get the data might look arbitrarily, it can look good, but the evidence of critical thought says they're terrible for us. The purification, the everything that the industrialization process, the hexanes they use in them, all these things are highly toxic and they have to be stained and dyed and bleached and all these things to make them not smell rancid on the shelves. It's unreal that there is still a fight to say they're good for you, but I'm going to say seed oils for sure. The next one of that's going to be sugar. It gives way to all kinds of opportunistic bad guys, fungal overgrowth, the works. So stress, sugar, and seed oils are the top three things I think are really destroying our guts. But then there's another side of that, which is artificial chemicals. We have, back in the 1990s, there used to be 700 to 900, give or take, pesticides approved for use in North America. It's almost 20,000 today. In fact, they've recently reintroduced pesticides that were banned. There's one in particular called chlorpyrifos. It was actually approved for use, I believe, in the 50s. It was banned again in the 70s or 80s, and they reintroduced it. Chlorpyrifos was invented by the Nazis for chemical warfare to kill people, and they're putting it on our food. And then glyphosate, again, there's a whole battle against it. Now they recently introduced another one, which Dr. Mark Hyman was blasting on his Instagram, which is something like 400 times more toxic to humans, and it's still being put on our food. Like these, what do you call them? The WMIS, I believe it is, or what's the sheets? Material safety data sheet. That's what it is. MSDS, the material safety data sheet for these chemicals for glyphosate literally says do not expose to the environment. And they spray it to the tune of billions of pounds all over our food, all over our soil, which has killed our soil, which is killing nutrients, which is killing Earth's ability to breathe through microbes. You're worried about the climate? Stop spraying this shit on everything.
Yeah. Wow. That's scary, man. Scary stuff for sure.
Those are my rants. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
I
I
get
love
so
it.
heated. I love you're like, you're so elegant on a podcast, and here I am rambling at top speed and swearing, fuck these guys. it really riles me up, man, because it's so stupid and so obvious, and it's hard to see it as anything but malicious intent.
Yeah, no, it's great, man. I know your buttons. I'm trying to poke the bear a little bit here, so
Ooh,
this is good. And
thank you.
maybe this
Speaking of
is
chronic stress,
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, okay, so maybe this is an overly obvious question, but how
sure.
does one know that they are experiencing digestive issues that are a little bit more serious? Is it because they're ending up in a position like your mother was, or are there other things kind of underlying where people are like ignoring, or they think it's like normal?
That's a ticket right there. You said it. They think it's normal. And the problem is, we look statistically, depends on the sample size you pull, but it's 60 to 72% of Americans complain of gut issues at least once a week. Gas, bloat, pain, cramping, nausea, vomiting, acid reflux, constipation, diarrhea, something in their gut once a week. And so we can say 2/3 of the population has an early start of a gut issue that's under the IBS or irritable bowel syndrome umbrella. 2/3. Now, if we take it a step further, we also know that North America, again, is less than 5% of the globe. They have upwards of 50% of the world's cases of Crohn's and colitis, which are severe bowel diseases, which can be mouth to anus for Crohn's and the large bowel for ulcerative colitis or colitis. It's accompanied by ulcers, bleeding, extreme weight loss, debilitating pain, the works. In fact, something Mr. Beast actually was talking about recently on DOAC is, or Diary of a CEO, is his Crohn's disease. Fully fixable, fully reversible, dare I say the word curable in the vast majority of cases. But we have 2/3 of the population who start with a low grade gut issue. You have 50% of all the cases in the world in North America, which is less than 5% of the globe. So it's clearly an us problem. Now, I'm going to connect the dots for you here. It might sound like a lot of data, but then we know upwards of 20% of all Crohn's colitis patients had a previous diagnosis of IBS. Well, if 2/3 of the population has a gut issue, many of them are not diagnosed. How many cases of Crohn's colitis actually did have IBS that progressed and got worse and turned to Crohn's colitis or severe bowel disease? What I'm getting at here, Casey, is that it's kind of like wearing a pair of shoes without socks, where you go for a walk and that heel rubs and gets red and blisters and bleeds. You start with IBS or minor symptoms, which are, quote, normal, because everyone's got them, but they're not optimal. You shouldn't have that, but everyone's got it. So we call it normal. And then it gets worse. You start having cognitive issues, your menstrual issues, you're having dark, thick, clotted blood, PMS symptoms, weight gain, mood swings, inability to focus, joint pain, erectile dysfunction, whatever you're dealing with, skin problems, fatigue. And then things get worse. Like, well, I'm dealing with constipation. Now I'm having a bowel movement every couple of days, which again, some doctors will say is normal because it's happening so often we've accepted it. You should be at least once a day, if not twice. It depends on how much fiber you're eating. I'm not a huge advocate for fiber in general, but that's fine. But you should be going at least once daily. 2 to 3 days, that's a problem. I've had people at 2 and 3 weeks come to see me and their doctor says, well, we'll get it. Just take this Miralax or whatever else. It's crazy. So we've accepted these as normal. So how long does it go until you have blood in the stool? Until you have some kind of debilitating disease that gets a diagnosis, which eventually gets you a medication, right? Imagine going to your doctor with redness on your heel and it's starting to blister, and they look at that and go, "Well, come back when it's down to the bone, and I'll see what we can do." Your doctor would look and go, "Well, your shoe's too tight, or your socks are wet. It's clearly rubbing. Like, let's intervene now so it doesn't get worse." With your gut, unless you fit under the umbrella of a diagnosable disease condition, they say, "Well, here's something for your anxiety. It's all in your head. If it gets worse, come back," and it will, and you will be back.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you're mentioning all these diagnoses. This was something I was really curious about. Are these all vastly different in the way that they manifest? Is it easy to tell whether somebody has colitis versus IBS, IBD, or Crohn's or whatever? Or are they all basically different symptoms of the exact same kind of problem?
I love that you bring that up. And this is why I believe we've been so successful in reversing hundreds now of cases of Crohn's colitis, people off medication who are told it's an autoimmune genetic condition you'll have for life. Here's what happens. We put them on a spectrum, just like the wear and tear. You start with minor symptoms. Eventually, they get bad enough to be diagnosed with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, which can get worse, which can turn into ulcerative colitis, which is inflammation of the large intestine, which can get worse and turn into Crohn's, which is inflammation anywhere from mouth to anus. That's sort of the 4 stages of progression. Now, someone can jump from healthy to colitis. Many people go from IBS to colitis, or many people skip and go right to Crohn's. It's a spectrum where some people will hop, But for the most part, if we take this as a general umbrella and say, look, it's a wear and tear on the system, go back to the shoe to be this analogy to death. If you're wearing shoes that are two sizes too small, you're going to get blisters. But if you put sand in that shoe, it's going to be a lot worse, a lot faster. If you add glass and now your shoe is also wet and you're walking on a hike on rocky terrain, you're going to chew your foot up real fast. And that's how we started looking at this with gut issues. Is it a minor irritant your body is trying to work on? Or is it something really major that breaks through so fast your body can't keep up and now you have this disease? And so there are predisposing factors like genetics, right, which will make you predisposed, but your genes do not cause these diseases. Genes don't cause disease. They're correlated, but they don't act in a vacuum. And so something, environment, toxins, stress, microbes, whatever it is, can cause these genes to express really poorly, like turning up a volume knob. And you can turn that volume knob back down. But your genes do not dictate your disease. If you got Crohn's or colitis, I'm telling you right now, it is fully reversible and your doctor is dead wrong. Dead wrong.
Wow. That's fascinating. Okay, with hundreds of cases, obviously you've been able to identify different patterns. Everybody's obviously very different, and they do have slightly different genes, but for the most part, there's definitely patterns to fixing this. And so, what are some of your first steps when you find somebody who's sought you out to fix their digestive issues? Again, there's going to be some general patterns. What things do you see, and where do you typically like to start with people?
First thing we want to do is identify the root cause, right? Like you can't empty a bathtub unless you turn off the water. So we have to figure out what's contributing to the disease. Some people will say, well, stress caused mine. My argument is this, Casey. You and I deal with stress. We'll deal with death in the family, loss, traumas, things will happen, right? Financial ruin, whatever it is. Most of us do not bleed from the bowel from a stressful event. So your cup was already full. That stress was the last drop that made it overflow. So we have to answer really three questions. Number one, what filled your cup or is currently filling your cup? Number two, why isn't your cup able to drain? Like, why can't it empty like my cup or your cup or someone else's? Why is your body forced to keep the stuff inside? Number three, now that the cup has overflowed for months or years, what else has gotten wet? What other systems in your body have now been compromised? Gallbladder, liver, bile ducts are huge. Like your drainage pathways, how things exit the body. We see a lot of immune imbalances. In fact, I'm kind of going on a tangent because there's a whole conversation here to disprove immediately why they're not genetic, autoimmune, or unknown conditions. But the long and short, there's a reason you got sick, right? You don't get the flu in isolation by yourself. You have to get inoculated with a microbe or a virus or something that causes you to become ill. Just like somebody who's healthy, one day gets sick. Your doctor goes, it's genetic. It just happens sometimes. This is the age it happens. Bullshit. Something had to make you sick. We can identify what that is. They're just not looking.
Got it. That's very well explained. I really appreciate that. When you're looking at somebody's diet, again, we talked about some of the biggest offenders. I would imagine that the best approach is to get the processed stuff out and stick with mostly whole foods. Is that a safe assumption?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. There's a really great book to be coming out, but I just released an episode recently on my podcast with Eric Edmeades. And he's got this book he's writing on the concept called the evolution gap. And what it talks about is that our world, our environments, our food, our technology is evolving much faster than our biology. And so we're living in a world that is not compatible with our own DNA. We're meant to be barefoot in the grass. Like the healthiest people you'll ever see from a chronic disease standpoint are hunter gatherer tribes. They eat animals off the land, they pick fruit from the trees, they walk barefoot in the grass or outside exposed to the sun, the dirt, the soil. We know this even in modernized, industrialized cities. Those who grow up on farms, away from pesticides, outside, interacting with the animals in the soil, have the most robust immune systems and gut microbiomes, and they have the best health outcomes, traditionally speaking. The worst case, hyper sanitized, high rise city, isolated by yourself, wearing a mask all the time, you're cleaning your hands, you're sterilizing your food. That's the worst case scenario for you in your health outcomes because you don't have the microbes to boost and buffer your immune system. So there's absolutely correlations here we have to consider, but the layers go so much further than we're told. We're told disease is black and white. You have it or you do not. There are three reasons we get sick, Casey. Three. And everything in my 10 years experience, and someone wants to tell me otherwise, I'll accept that. It's fine. But in my 10 years, I've distilled it down to three things. Number one, it's toxins. Some kind of heavy metal, pesticides, chemicals, chronic stress, chronically high blood sugar. It can be, alcohol. It can be poisons, whatever. Some kind of toxin gets into your system, right? And that's what makes it sick. It's an offense your body has to get rid of, or it causes an imbalance and makes you very ill. Number two, it's deficiencies. Deficiencies of sunlight, fresh air, exercise, deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, amino acids, like basic nutrients your body needs. The third reason is microbes. It's going to be parasites, viruses, fungus, bacteria, something that infects your body, causing an immune reaction to respond. That's the three reasons we get sick: some kind of toxin, some sort of deficiency, some sort of microbe. Those three things apply to every disease, from bowel diseases across the board. And using this plus their own data, this is where I'll say, if we want to branch this far, Crohn's and colitis, which are the severe end of the digestive disease spectrum, which you're at risk for right now. If you have bloat or constipation, diarrhea, you're at risk. They are not autoimmune, genetic, or idiopathic, meaning unknown cause, like they say they are. And their own data disproves this.
Yeah, wow. It's so empowering because it gives people permission to say, like, oh, I can fix this. I can deal with this if I'm willing to go through this process and address some of these things. I'm really curious to ask you about something that you've already mentioned earlier, which is fiber. If I've mentioned this before, but if I Google who is a low fiber diet recommended for, I see the list of all the different things we've already talked about. Excuse me. I see the list of, diverticulitis. I see the list that includes Crohn's disease and all these things. And it's like, we realize for some people, fiber really can be beneficial. Different types of fiber we can debate about might be beneficial, more beneficial for somebody or not. For other people, they may need to cut it out, at least for a time, or maybe for even a long term. How do you look at the usefulness and utility of fiber? Is that a very highly individualized thing?
Yeah, it's got to be anecdotal. I don't subscribe to the dogma that one is point blank bad or good. And I'll tell you why. We have to look at the evidence of our eyes and ears beyond our own belief, our comfort system, or our preferences, and understand, objectively speaking. I've seen clients thrive on a vegan, whole food, plant based diet. Good for them. I've seen clients thrive on a carnivore, red meat only, and water salt diet, like the lion diet. So both can work. The question we have to ask is what works for me. So, generally speaking, we have lots of data where if you're constipated, diarrhea, diverticulitis, Crohn's colitis, IBS, removing fiber actually helps you. So, would it not stand to reason that removing fiber may also be beneficial in someone who's already healthy? But this is the question we have to ask. If I'm jumping on a trampoline and my leg is broken, it's going to be really bad for me. But by stressing my bones and joints and muscles and lymphatic system, jumping on a trampoline as a healthy person, it's actually good for me. So, where does fiber really fit in? And this is a conversation we have to have. We look at data. I talk about the study all the time. I think it's really more foundational, gets credit for. From Cell Reports back in 2018 or 19, they took gut microbiomes, so GI maps. They measured rural and urban Nigerians and compared them to urban Americans. And what they found is these urban Nigerians were kind of the middle ground, but the disparity here in gut bacteria, what was in their guts, was largest between urban Americans and rural Nigerians. So living on the farm, on the land, barefoot in the grass. And they found they had more microbes in Nigeria that were there to digest and ferment fibers, way more than we have over here. So the argument is it our chemicals? Is it our lifestyle? Have we just not needed them over time? That we've lost our fiber digesting microbes? Maybe, right? Your body, for example, we say, well, we need fiber for your microbes to digest and produce butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid. It's a primary fuel source for your intestinal cells, really good for your gut lining and for energy and inflammation, immunity, all that. Well, there are microbes that can also take protein and produce butyrate. And we just happen to have more of those than they have, and they have more that can digest plant fiber. So I think it's part of what's like a microevolutionary mechanism. And then we also have to look at what's called generational dysbiosis. Now, this is from Justin and Erica Sonnenberg from Stanford. And what they assert, and they've seen this in mice, it would just take too long to do in humans, is that over the decades, over the generations, we've lost microbes. They get passed on like DNA, right? So great great grandmother, back to 1865, pre-industrial revolution. Say she has 1,000 microbes. And then she gives birth to grandma, who's right at the stage of industry, chemicals, toxins, right? Who gives birth to the next right after antibiotics have been into our systems. We've lost more microbes. And then she gives birth to you, for example. So now here we are past the 1950s. So we're well into the 70s or 80s. And all your seed oils and junk food and pesticides are at an all-time high. And then you give birth to your kids. who have from what great grandmother had as 1,000 microbes. We lose them, lose them, lose them. Now you got 200 left to give. So we're seeing what looks to be, or theoretically, an extinction of microbes over time called generational dysbiosis. And so there's a lot more to this picture. So I think it's unwise to subscribe to the dogma of this is good for everyone or this is bad for everyone. Try it and let me know. If you tell me whole food plant-based diet works for you and your symptoms are gone, who the hell am I to argue with you, right? It doesn't make any sense. I would be a bad clinician. So I say both and.
I love that. Thank you for that perspective. I really love that. We, definitely promote a carnivore diet, and it's not like we're screaming at plant-based people or vegans
Mm.
that they, need to change. It's just what we do. If you want to do this with us, we can help you do that. And today, for me personally, is a special day because today is my 6-year carniversary. It was 6 years ago today that I've been on a mostly carnivore diet with a few deviations. In your experience, I know we probably can't know this. This would be very hard to measure, but just anecdotally, do you ever get concerned with people that have been long term on a carnivore diet without any real measurable amount of fiber? Like if some guacamole or an avocado makes it in here or there, that might be something, but it's really fairly low. Do you ever get concerned about long term carnivores?
No. I mean, I've talked to the long-term carnivores. Sean Baker, Anthony Chafee, Robert Kiltz. These guys are like the carnivores of carnivores. And I've met and talked to all of them. We've done podcasts together. I'm not concerned about their health. They're medical doctors. They're not concerned about their health. So who am I? Here's my thought on this one. Let's take a step back and look at blood work. If you go to your doctor and you feel generally unwell, something's going on, you're anxious, you got joint pain, you got whatever, they look at your blood work and they say, oh, it's normal. You're fine. That normal is based on the population in your city or in your state, where they've taken the average population, they compiled the number and said, this is what's normal across the current population. Therefore, if you're in this range, you're fine. What we've neglected to recognize, we know with the data, 92% of our population is metabolically unhealthy, which means their blood work is not healthy. So, therefore, by definition, if you're normal, you are unhealthy because you're matching the population of unhealthy people. And so we take these already skewed metrics and say, this is what cholesterol could look like or should look like, for example, which is a big argument in carnivore diet where your cholesterol is too high. Well, have we looked at the cholesterol of the Inuit people who have been carnivores their entire lives, who do not have the diseases we have, or traditional Mongolians who still drink raw milk and eat horse meat and camel meat and all the things, and they're bigger and stronger and healthier and have no health problems? What does their cholesterol look like? So we have a bias already skewed lens. And if your foundation, if what you're looking at as quote normal is already skewed, then every piece of information you pull to hold people to the dogma of your numbers is therefore already incorrect. So instead of looking at people's numbers, well, you're high risk because, are you sick or are you not? Are there deeper markers you can test for heart disease? Yes, there are lots of things you can test for heart disease, see if you're at risk or if you've had a heart attack. I'm not, again, this goes back to paramedic days over a decade ago. I think it's troponin or something. I could be way off. Someone's going to flame me for this. But you can check the blood to see, have you had a heart attack? You can see that. There's a protein or something in there. So here's the thing. Your blood doesn't have to be normal because normal is sick. And I'll just cap this off with one sort of quick story for you, Casey. I had a client years back when I was a personal trainer. I was just learning how to read blood work. And she had low thyroid, so hypothyroid. And when you have a low active or underactive thyroid, there's a hormone that's up they measure called TSH. It's thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, this is when your body, your brain, pituitary gland detects and says, hey, we don't have enough active thyroid. So your pituitary creates this thyroid stimulating hormone to make your thyroid make more. It says, we don't have enough, go make more. Now, the question is, are you not converting inactive to active? Like, where is this deficiency? Are you just not making enough? Point being, she went to her doctor and her TSH level was 4.2 or 4.3. Now, at the time, the reference range was 2 to 4. If you were within that, you are normal. She was like a 4.2 or 3. So she was just above normal. This was in December. Her doctor said, well, it's a little elevated. We'll keep an eye on it. If it gets worse, we can get you on medication. So she came back 3 months later after the new year, now in February, March. She went to her doctor. Her TSH is now 5.7. Her doctor says, well, it's normal. So we'll keep an eye on it. If it gets worse, come back and get you medication. What happened? In that time, that 3 month span, the range was adjusted from 2 to 4 to 2 to 6.5. They added 67%, and her doctor didn't have the wherewithal to say, wait a minute, you're outside of the optimal range for human biology. They looked at the green or the red mark on the computer. The computer said, you're good, you're a normal, so we're fine. We're not going to look at it. So now we're treating numbers and not patients. We've gone to normal, which is sick, rather than optimal, which is thriving. And we wonder why at 5% of the population, we're 70% of the global pharmaceutical profits.
Wow. That's a great
Yeah,
story. It's terrible, but that's a great story.
it's happening to
Crazy.
everybody, man. We call it medical gaslighting. You're
Oh my
fine,
goodness.
go home. Here's an antidepressant. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay. You mentioned testing. This is another thing I wanted to ask you about. Is there any kind of test, a stool test, blood work, whatever, that you find to be particularly helpful?
Yes. So a lot of people with gut issues want to go right away and get a GI map. So that's going to be a microbiome test. They test to see what bacteria are high or low. To me, and I used to swear by these because when I first got into them, they were so helpful. We could correct a lot. But now, knowing what I know now, it's a downstream problem. I want to know, I can see your bacteria is screwed up. I can see what's in there, but it doesn't tell me why it's screwed up. Now, if history says it's been poor diet, it's been high stress, and like you're fine otherwise, okay, let's address that. But if you've got a severe disease, Crohn's or colitis, something else, that inflammation led to a landscape where your bacteria then became imbalanced. So instead of measuring bacteria now on the downstream, let's go upstream to the top. I want to figure out what started this whole process. And in doing so, this is where we can look at a couple things. Blood, if you understand functional blood chemistry, I had a guest on my show, Leanne Vogel, shout out to her, was the first one who taught me about this. You can tell a huge story from somebody by looking at their blood. You can tell if there's parasites or fungus or H. pylori by looking at blood. It's amazing. So you can see all of this. On the other hand, you can get what's called an HTMA, a hair tissue mineral analysis. And if you know how to read them, you can see if someone's body's trying to detox. You can see if they're stressed, having adrenal issues. You can see all of that in their metals, in their minerals, and electrolytes. On the other hand, there's what's called an organic acid test. And so this is going to be a P test, which pulls up all the byproducts like exhaust your cells create. You can go all the way back to like the Krebs cycle. If you remember high school bio, you can see that in an organic acid. You can see Clostridia, nasty bacteria in the wrong sense when it's overgrown. You can see fungus, some strains of mold, detox pathways, all this through an organic acid test. Or if you say, hey, I got all the money in the world, I want to cover all my bases, do a total tox and a gut zoomer. Vibrant Wellness will do them. A total tox burden does hair tissue mineral, so checking for heavy metals. They're going to do blood. You can check for mold, and they check for environmental toxins, so pesticides, plastics, all that stuff. And then the gut zoomer is where you're looking at your gut, your microbiome, leaky gut markers, inflammatory markers, liver detox pathways, bile. You can see if you're recirculating toxins that way, leaky gut, zonulin levels. All of that can be tested for about $1,000. You can do a full panel on everything.
Yeah.
So if money isn't detracting you, go get a total tox test. That's fine. If you want one test only, I would go with an organic acid or an HTMA. And if you have a specialist who's really nailed this down, blood work will be fine.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's very, very helpful. I really appreciate that. If you would go back 10 years into my career, there were certain supplements that it would just be like, no question, these are your core supplements. Everybody takes these. You take a fish oil, you take a multi, you take probiotics. That's just like across the board. That was good for everybody all the time. And I recommended that because I got paid to sell supplements at the
Sure.
company that I was at. But also, I just thought everybody needed them. And I definitely evolved my thinking on all of those and most supplements. Um, yeah, probiotics in particular. How do you find them to be particularly helpful? It seems just kind of like we're just in such an infancy as far as learning about the microbiome and what we even want or need, or is this even helpful? Like, how do you think about probiotics in particular?
I think they have a place. Here's the thing about probiotics, they kind of get touted as a be all end all. For example, somebody with bowel disease, there are particular paths of their immune system that are hyperinflamed. We call these Th2, sometimes Th9, but primarily Th2 and Th17. Now, this stands for T helper. It's part of your immune system. And if you think of each arm of your immune system like an octopus, they each do a different thing. One's parasites, one's viruses, one's flus, one's whatever. Well, these immune pathways are connected to histamine type responses. So we know these from hives, rashes, allergies like anaphylaxis. These histamine responses can cause issues inside of your gut. Certain probiotics can elicit histamine responses or liberate histamines, causing more gut symptoms. So they could make you worse. Like if you drink bone broth and you're way worse, I'm looking at histamines for you, or Clostridia bacterial overgrowth. So there's nuances to all of it, right? Just because it's good for someone's gut doesn't mean it's good for your gut. And so, generally speaking, can probiotics be helpful? Yes. But is it extraordinarily contextual? Also, yes. For example, there are bacteria in the guts of these hunter gatherer tribes where if we introduce them to our gut, we would get horribly ill and possibly die because they have the ecosystem to contain it. And if you think of it kind of like a city, right? If you had a violent offenders rehab facility that had the police and the guards and all that to manage it properly, great. It could be good for society and maybe they can reintegrate, you're fine. But if you put it into a small town like Fairyland in Newfoundland of 500 people with no guards, you're going to have chaos. So if you don't have the ecosystem to support or maintain or keep these bacteria in balance, they can be just as problematic. And so we have to understand probiotics as a wash are all contextual. If you've got SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and you introduce bacteria which are already overgrown, you could contribute to the problem, like pouring gasoline on a fire. But if you introduce specific strains or genus of Lactobacillus reuteri, those are bacteriocins. So they can actually consume or kill off or destroy bacteria. So there are certain things that can be good again in context. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. It's like I'm building a house, pass me the hammer. What are you trying to do? You're trying to bang in a nail or you're trying to install a toilet, right? It's going to be different.
Love that answer. Man, this has been like a total 35,000-foot view of all of this stuff. Luckily for us, you do two podcasts, and they're both wonderful and very, very well done. I have to say also, I love this. You've included some of the like candid moments in your podcast, Josh, that I absolutely love. Like you'll leave it for the end. Like if your wife makes a noise or something interrupts or whatever, like you'll have a little back and forth with her, which you include, which I love. Keep doing that. I love that
I'm
stuff.
glad you found that episode in particular. I think we've done that maybe once in 160 some odd
Oh my
episodes,
goodness.
and that's the one you found, which is hilarious. But yes, we're pretty raw with our stuff.
I love that. No, I absolutely love that. I'm saving a file for all my like podcasting bloopers that I might release in like a special episode at the end of the year, just like all the ridiculous stuff I screw up in the introduction or whatever. But again, luckily you do two of these podcasts. You do such a tremendous job taking some of these questions that I'm asking you about and making them into really extended, very helpful 30-minute, just you talking about it, which is wonderful, and also doing amazing interviews. I've loved the episode where you interviewed Temple Stewart. That was really, really well done. Anyway, tell people about your podcasts, what the name of them are, and how what distinguishes the two of them.
Thanks so much, Casey. I really appreciate that. So we got two shows. The first one is called ReverseABLE. That's Reverse Able, ABLE. And great play on words to see on paper. Terrible to have to say out loud, but that's ReverseABLE. And that's the one where we pick topics that our audience or our listeners, whoever's asking, and I'll do a quick 15 to 30 minute explaining it, answering your question. You can write into my show and I'll make an episode for you. So that's the first one that we do. The second, of course, it is like a famous guest. We've had Lisa Bilyeu and Stephen Gundry, Bruce Lipton, Dave Asprey, the works. We've had some amazing, amazing guests on the show, and they're way smarter than I am. So that's why we have them there. That's ReverseABLE. The second one I have was actually what's what I'm looking for? We had repurposed content. I got a Facebook group called IBD Support and Solutions. That's for inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and colitis. We've got about 14,000 people in this group. And every week for years, I've been doing a live training where you say, hey, it's not autoimmune, genetic, or unknown. Here's what your root causes probably are. Here's what you need to know about food. Here's whatever. And I took those lives and we actually decided let's put them in a more accessible place that's not behind like a private group. So we put them on this podcast called Reversing Crohn's and Colitis Naturally. And I'm telling you, one episode, I get this feedback on the regular. I've learned more from you in 20 minutes than from my doctor in 20 years. And we're going to break the mold for you. You'll never see these diseases the same way again. So if you've got any kind of gut issue from bloat to diseases like Crohn's colitis, listen to ReverseABLE. And if you've got Crohn's colitis specifically, you want help and you're like, dude, I know this is fixable, reversible. What my doctors told me is crap, like no pun intended, but it is not right. Something has to be causing this. You want to get to your root and reverse, dare I say, cure these diseases. Now, it's a very touchy word and I'll get flamed for that, but listen to Reversing Crohn's and Colitis Naturally. It's going to change the way you see your disease forever.
Man, well, both of them are awesome. I really appreciate the different style of both of them. And I have to say, as somebody that consumes a lot of content audibly and not as much visually as I'm out on a walk or grounding myself and getting sunlight, I really appreciate that you decided to release that that content as well. Most people don't know that to podcast we pay for stuff unless you're doing ads or monetizing in some way. Like this show is paid for by me, and then you do the same. And so to know that you paid to have that content put out there for free for people is just super helpful. So a lot of respect for deciding to do that.
I appreciate that. And I think that's something that isn't commonly known. It's like these podcasters must be rich. Like it costs me $1,000 a month to have my podcast, get it edited, get it done. Like I pay for this and it's my time. So like it's many hours and it's out of pocket. But this is what the industry does. We love it and we are committed to making sure these are available to you guys. So take advantage of them. It's free resources. There's all kinds of good stuff you can find out there. You just got to know where to look.
Yep. And as you say, it takes a few seconds for somebody to go onto the podcast and leave a review. So I encourage anybody to go and find your podcast and leave a review. It's so easy and it really is very meaningful to us and it really helps. We have our same call to action after every episode where we ask people to do it. And yeah, just take the time to do it. Anybody who's out there listening, find Josh's shows and leave a review. It's very, very quick and it helps the message get out to more people. It really does make a difference. And like I said, if nothing else, it's very meaningful for us as podcast hosts.
Absolutely. And I'm going to make sure, Casey, I'm leaving a review for your show on all platforms. So I
You're the
appreciate
best.
that.
I'll do the same to yours. I'll do the same to yours, and they will be very genuine. I really do love your content. I don't know, Josh. I felt like coming into this interview, you are somebody that I feel like I've known for a very, very long time. I feel like we go way back. I love your energy. I love how you're putting this out there and helping so many people with alternate information. And again, to me, it's very empowering. Again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for taking the time to be on our show today, Josh. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Easiest place, one-stop shop. You want to find me on social, it's at joshdech.health. But if you want to find the podcast, you want to find links to the social, everything in one spot, head to gutsolution.ca. That's all singular, gutsolution.ca for Canada. And you can find links to everything, free stuff, links to the podcast, downloadable guides, the works. You want to have a conversation, my email's there.
Great. Awesome. We'll link to all of that in the show notes as well so people can find that very easily. Josh Dech, thank you again so very much for all of the work that you've done to take a quite traumatic childhood and witness the things that you saw and, want to do something about it and keep searching until you found better solutions and get that message out to people to really help is really inspiring. And I just so grateful for you and so grateful that you take the time to be on our show today. We really, really appreciate you.
I appreciate this platform you made, Casey. You're doing great work, man. Keep it up.
Thank you very, very much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.